All right, so we're in Mark, right? We're in Mark. We're in this incredible moment in the gospel where Jesus, the whole time in the Gospel of Mark, we're learning about the life of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus, and we're seeing him constantly get into like these arguments and fights, and he's really irritating to one particular group of people. The religious people, right? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, the guys that are holding the religious power in Israel. And Jesus is kind of bumping up against them constantly throughout the Gospel of Mark. But now we've gotten to a point where they have decided it's more than irritating. We're done dealing with this guy. We need to get rid of him. And so they've actually arrested him. So last week we looked at that, the arrest of Jesus. They actually sent guys out at night and found him and arrested him and brought him into this trial to have the Jewish trial. We looked at both of those stories last week. And so now what's happening now this week, we're going to look at what's happening outside in the courtyard as Jesus is being tried. He's in this trial, this Jewish trial. And that ended in him being convicted, and his punishment was to be put to death, they decided. And then, they're so angry at him, the guys on the ruling council get down and start to beat him and spit on him and all this, okay? And then the guards take him away and beat him some more. So while that's all happening inside, we're gonna look outside at what's happening with this one of Jesus' 12 disciples, Peter, okay? This guy, Peter. Now, this story that we're gonna look at today is incredibly important because as we look at the larger context of how Jesus is picking his disciples, what that kind of looks like to follow Jesus and to learn about Jesus and start to turn your life toward him. But then it's showing us something here about Peter having a profound failure. That's what we're going to look at. The biggest failure in Peter's life, we're going to look at in the scriptures, in the Bible, right? And just think for a moment, what if your biggest failure was recorded in a book that millions of people, for the rest of human history, are going to read? They're going to study. They're going to have quiet times over and go, oh, I'm going to look at Jane's worst decision of her whole life, and I'm going to try to learn from that, right? Okay, that's what we're doing. We're going to look at Peter's total failure in his life, and we're going to be hopefully encouraged by what happens next, by what happens afterward, and what Jesus does with Peter. Okay, so first we've got to understand the context a little bit. I want to remind you what happened we're in chapter 14 of the Gospel of Mark, but before we read our little story for the day, I want to flip one page over back. If you have an old-fashioned paper Bible, it's one page back, still in chapter 14 of Mark. I want to remind you of the context of what's happening. Basically, the last few weeks we've been going through chapter 14. It's all happening in one night. Okay, this is one evening. It begins with the Last Supper, where Jesus sits down with his 12 disciples, and they have this Passover meal, and he calls out Judas and says, "You're going to betray me," and Judas leaves. And then Jesus says something to the remaining 11 disciples. He says in verse 27 of chapter 14, he says, "You will all fall away," Jesus told them. "For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." Okay, this happens at dinner time. Okay, this exchange where Jesus is prophesying. He's saying, you all are going to fall away because it is written, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered, okay? He's like, it's just going to happen. This is what's going to happen when I'm arrested, when I'm going to go to the cross. And Peter hears that, and his kind of pride rises up. No, you're talking about everybody else. You don't understand how committed I am. You don't understand how much I love you, how all in I am as a disciple of you, Jesus. Everybody else is going to fall away, but never me. And Jesus goes, no, actually today, tonight, you're going to disown me, not once, not twice, 3 times, okay? Before the rooster crows twice in the morning, okay? This very night, you're going to disown me. And Peter goes, no way. No way. I don't believe you. I will die for you, okay? You can't get much more like extreme than that, right? Like okay, I don't even care. I'll die for you. That's where I'm at. Jesus goes, okay, well, we'll just see how this night goes then, all right? So they leave. They get done with dinner. They go out to the Garden of Gethsemane, right? And Jesus prays, and then this gang with clubs and swords come to arrest Jesus. And at that moment, what happens? All of the disciples bolt and run, okay? We looked at that last week. Okay, everyone just runs away and scatters, right? Like fulfilling Jesus' prophecy, like 20 minutes later after he said it, right? And yet, so Peter runs away, but Peter, as he's like running away and they're arresting Jesus, I think there's something going on in his mind going, now wait a minute, 20 minutes ago, I said I wouldn't do this. I said that, like, not me. Everybody else is going to turn away, but not me. I'm even going to die. I looked Jesus in the eye and made a commitment that I would die for him. And so there's something tugging, I think, internally at Peter, because what he ends up doing is he ends up going, well, okay, I'm going to stop running. I'm going to like sneak behind them as they're taking Jesus away, and they're taking him to the house of the high priest upstairs, where they're holding a kind of a night Sanhedrin, which they weren't supposed to do, but they did it anyway because they just wanted to do this secretly and get Jesus tried, and so they could get on with this thing and the people wouldn't know about it. And so he follows them. And he sneaks into the courtyard where there's a fire. Some people are around the fire. And he's, the text we looked at last week, it says that Peter's down there warming himself by the fire. Like he's going, ooh, it's a little chilly. I need to get warm. Meanwhile, upstairs, Jesus is going through this ordeal, this trial with the Sanhedrin, okay? And so something's tugging at Peter. He's the only disciple that's followed and kind of wants to know what's going on here. So I think there's some kind of internal wrestling that's going on inside of him. There must be. But that brings us now to our text today of what actually happens as he's warming himself by the fire. Jesus is inside in this Jewish trial. Let's look at our text today. So we're going to start in verse 66, okay? So here we go. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I do not know or understand what you're talking about, he said, and he went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you're one of them, for you are a Galilean. He began to call down curses and swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. Immediately, the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and he wept. All right. So in this account, we see an incredible contrast between the faithfulness of Jesus and the faithlessness of Peter, right? That inside, we have Jesus standing trial, being questioned by the Sanhedrin, the ruling council. And outside in the courtyard, we have Peter having his own kind of a trial, being questioned. And yet Jesus is being questioned by the most powerful man in Jerusalem, the high priest, and the ruling council, like the pinnacle of power, are asking him questions and making false accusations against him. And yet he's responding with the truth. They're accusing him of being a terrorist, of wanting to destroy the temple, of saying that he was going to destroy the temple, which he never said. So they're making false accusations. They have all this power and influence, and he's telling the truth. Outside, we have Peter being questioned by, in that culture, someone that would have been the least powerful, a servant girl. Okay? Women in that culture had no power, had no clout. And this was a servant. Okay? So a servant girl was not usually someone that many grown men would have been fearful of, and yet Peter is quaking like with fear as she's asking him who he is, right? And she's asking accurate questions. She's making accurate accusations against him. You're with Jesus, aren't you? And Peter's just lying his face off, right? No, I'm not. No, I'm not, right? What a contrast. What a contrast between what's happening inside with Jesus, what's happening outside with Peter. It's highlighting, it's showing us something about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. That this whole endeavor really is about the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. It's not about how amazing we are at being his followers. It's about how amazing Jesus is at being the Lord and Savior that we are following, that we are reaching toward, that we want to be like, but it's not because of us and how great we are. Peter is just demonstrating that to us, because as he's questioned here, the girl goes, okay, you're with Jesus, aren't you? And he goes, no, I'm not. I don't even know the guy. And she goes, second time, yeah, I think you are. I think you are. You do know him. You're with him. And he goes, no, I'm not. So then another group of people go, no, you're a Galilean. In Luke's gospel, his account of this same story, he gives us another bit of insight. It's because of the accent. They said, we recognize your accent. You're Galilean. Okay, it's like if you're like from the deep south or something, right? You can't hide that, right? You're from Louisiana, aren't you? So that's Peter has the Galilean accent, so that's why they're going, you're Galilean, right? You are one of those guys with Jesus, and so now they have something on him, and he's starting to feel backed into a corner, like, oh no, they're like going to find out who I am, that I really am, and so what does he do? The text says in verse 71, he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. Now, that phrase, he began to call down curses, a lot of scholars, kind of debate about what exactly that means, but most likely what's happening here, that word curses, that verb, it's a transitive verb, it needs an object. So it's not like he just started like yelling out the F word or a string of expletives, right? He doesn't just start like swearing. No, he's actually cursing an object, a person, place, or a thing. Okay? And so in this context, it's most likely that what he is doing is cursing Jesus, because that's the way to prove. If you feel backed into a corner and these people are going, hey, you're Galilean, you are with Jesus, aren't you? He goes, you know what I need to do to prove that I'm not? I need to go nuclear. I need to start cursing him. That'll prove to them that I'm not with him, right? So probably what's happening is he starts cursing Jesus. Says, I don't know the man. And then he hears this rooster crowing. and it reminds him of what Jesus had said to him. That he, in all of his certainty and his pride, that he would never fall away, that he would die for Jesus. In that moment, he's realizing what an absolute fraud, what an absolute failure that he is. That he's not only denying Jesus, he's cursing him. And right then the rooster crows, right? Wow. Talk about a moral failure, right? Do you ever just get discouraged when you hear stories about like major Christian leaders falling into sin, right? Embezzling money, or, getting into, sexual stuff they shouldn't be doing, or drugs, or, bullying people or whatever they're doing, or trying to raise $22 million for a private jet because Jesus wants them to have the best, whatever it is, where you just go, is anybody out there like really following Jesus, right? You ever just go, Christian, why do so many Christian leaders just fall, and also just, everyday people? Some of you probably, if you've been attending church, longer than, if this is not your first time in church today, you've probably been hurt by people in the church before. Probably all of us, right, are going, gosh, there's something compelling about Jesus, but do I really have to deal with all these followers of Jesus around, they're the ones that drive me crazy. And it's a text like this that's showing us something so clear. Just imagine you're a Christian, you're a follower of Jesus, because at that time they weren't even called Christians yet. You're a follower of Jesus when Jesus is walking around, okay? You're alive during this story. Imagine. And you've heard Jesus, and you see everywhere he goes, he's got these 12 disciples, his leaders, his hand-picked leaders that are following him everywhere, that are learning from him, that get to be with him all the time, that get to do what he's doing and go out. He sends them out to do the same thing and teach and pray for people and all this. And so you respect them. Like, wow, I wish I could be one of those guys that are like, wow, they're with Jesus all the time. And imagine you're a fly on the wall watching this happen with Peter, like the key leader of Jesus. And you're watching Peter call down curses on Jesus in Jesus' moment of greatest need. Like, talk about disillusion from hypocrisy, right? Like, come on, is there no, good followers of Jesus out there? Are there no good Christian leaders out there, right? I would feel that way. And so often that's the way that things work in the world. Like that when somebody gets exposed for being a fraud or something, what do? You go, gosh, what a failure, what a fraud, get out of the way, right? I'm not following somebody like that, right? They're done. But something so interesting, so fascinating happens from this point. After this colossal failure of Peter, that Jesus goes through the suffering. He gets arrested, and he's gets beaten, and he gets sent to the Romans. We're going to look at that next, and then ultimately he's going to get crucified, put to death, and then he's going to be resurrected. And when he's resurrected, he appears again to his disciples, and he appears again to Peter. And so the next time Peter sees Jesus a couple of days later, Peter, I'm sure this story ends with him weeping, right? A lot of translations say he wept bitterly. Like there's something deep going on inside of him where he's realizing what he's done. There's guilt, there's shame, there's regret, there's all of that stuff weighing down on him. A couple days later, he's by the Sea of Galilee, and he goes, hey, let's go fishing. He gets in a boat, and he goes out, and they're fishing, and they're not catching anything. And this is recorded in John 21. And so then a guy on the shore calls out to them and says, hey, why don't you guys try fishing on the other side of the boat? Like, okay. They throw the net on the other side. Bam! There's like so many fish in this net that they can't even haul it in the boat. And so one of the guys in the boat goes, that's the Lord. And Peter jumps, he wraps his cloak around him, and he just jumps out of the boat and just swims. He just swims toward Jesus, right? And the other guys bring the boat in, and they haul the fish in, and says there was 153 fish. I love that small little detail. It's not because, what does 153 mean? Is it the stars? No. It just means that the story actually happened. It's like that there were 153 fish there. The Bible is full of these little details that don't do anything to help drive the narrative forward. They're just in there because they're true, because someone remembered it and kept it in the story. So they haul in 153 fish, and they go up to Jesus, and Jesus is sitting by a fire, okay? Now remember what Peter was doing when he denied him a couple days earlier. What's he doing? He's sitting by a fire, warming himself, okay? So now Jesus is the one sitting by a fire. Oh, hey, how you doing, Peter? Right? Sit down, let's have some fish together, right? So they eat some fish together. And then Jesus says to Peter, he says, Simon Peter, do you love me more than these? Now remember that the night when they were at the Last Supper, that Jesus said, you're all going to fall away. And Peter goes, not me, Lord. I am so committed. I love you so much. I love you more than everybody else, right? Everybody else is going to fall away, but not me. I will die for you, right? Filled with this kind of pride. And now Jesus shows back up and goes, hey, Peter, do you love me more than these? Peter goes, Lord, I love you. Peter, he says, feed my sheep. And he says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my sheep. Jesus says a third time, Peter, do you love me? Text says that Peter's like hurt now, that Jesus is asking him a third time, and he goes, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus says, feed my sheep. Now, what's happening here is two things that are pretty profound. First of all, it's a moment where Peter is repenting, is turning his life back toward Jesus, not with this kind of pride of like, oh, I'm just so amazing that I'm better than everybody else at following you. Just look out for me because I'm, no. He just has this simple like, Lord, I love you. And what Jesus is doing is he's saying, feed my sheep. What that means is lead my church. Sheep is this kind of metaphor that Jesus uses often. He's the shepherd over the sheep, the thing that he said at the Last Supper, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered, right? It's this metaphor of his church. And he's going, Peter, I want you to be the leader of my church. Feed my sheep. And this is so profound, right? Because like, why on earth would you, it's like, if someone was like this massive, they got exposed for embezzling money from a company, and then you come and you go, hey, I need a treasurer in my company. Would you come work for me, right? I need some guys to help me build my business and really make it, run well. Maybe I'll get those Enron guys, the top executives to come and run the books, you don't do that, right? You don't that's not like what the wise thing to do would be, right? And yet Jesus goes, no, now because you have failed, not just in spite of your failure, but actually because you failed, because you've actually gotten to the bottom of yourself, now I'm going to call you to be a great leader. Now I can actually use you to get something done because you're at a place of realizing it's about following me. That conversation in John 21 ends with Jesus saying just the simple words, follow me. That's what it's about, right? And what an amazing thing for an encouragement for all of us who have sinned, who have failed, who have made life decisions that have impact and consequences. That some of you had hopes and dreams to do some things in your life, and maybe that included to do some things with God, and you felt called by God to do some things, and then life happened. Series of decisions that you made, things that happened to you, and you find yourself in this place of going, not only is my life not where I wanted it to be, I don't even feel like I'm connected into what God wants me to be doing. That you had a plan A for your life, and you're like, I'm not even on plan B. I'm on plan X, like way down the line. I made so many mistakes and think, I'm way down the line, right? And what Peter is showing us here is something so profound. Now, don't miss this. Listen to this. That I want to remind you who the real author of the Gospel of Mark is. The guy writing it all down is Mark, this guy John Mark, okay? But he wasn't one of the 12 disciples. He wasn't there for all these events that are happening that he's writing about. The person that is the eyewitness testimony informing the Gospel of Mark is Peter. So Peter is dictating, he's telling all these stories to Mark, and Mark is, writing them down as fast as he can. And then Mark gets the credit by having the Gospel of Mark, right? Even though it probably ought to be called the Gospel of Peter. And so this gospel, which I'll also remind you, is the first gospel account, the first one written. And that it's most likely, most scholars think that the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke both had access to Mark. As they were writing those Gospels, they had the Gospel of Mark, and then they built on it with other eyewitness testimonies and things, okay? So Mark plays this incredibly central role, even in they're called the three synoptic Gospels. The three Gospels that synoptic means same eye. They're very similar. And you'll notice if you read the Gospel of John, it's quite different. John isn't sitting down with the Gospel of Mark and going, okay, I'm going to take a bunch of these stories and add on to them. John is doing his own thing, okay? So there's Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar to each other, and then John is a very different perspective, okay? Now, I say all that to say Peter has such an instrumental role in the development of the Gospel of Mark. And he writes other letters, right? 1st, 2nd Peter in the New Testament. He becomes the leader of the church in Jerusalem, the most towering figure in the early church, eclipsed only later by Paul, as Paul's kind of mission to the Gentiles takes off and all of that. But Peter, Paul has to come and meet with Peter to kind of get approval of some things, because Peter is like the man in Jerusalem, running the church in Jerusalem, okay? Incredibly significant role, incredibly significant leader. And not only that, we know that God actually really healed this thing inside of him, where at this moment in this courtyard, where he is so terrified to bear testimony to Jesus, to say, yes, I am with Jesus. He just can't do it. He buckles. We know later in his life, God heals that thing. And he does say, yes, I'm with Jesus. And he pays the ultimate price. He's put to death, most likely under the Nero persecution. And we know from other writings that reference the killing of Peter, that he actually was persecuted and put to death for his faith in Jesus. So there's a change, there's a transformation that happens in him. But I want to just point out something to you, that not only does God use him to, he's actually the one that puts this story in, right? He's the one saying, hey, I want you to record the moment where I deny Christ 3 times and even curse him. And Mark's probably going wait, are you sure you want that to be in the Gospel of Mark, right? Are you sure, right? And this is one of those things that historians point to as being part of the evidence of really Peter's fingerprints being on Mark. Because if he's the towering figure in the Church of Jerusalem, nobody would be writing a gospel account and including this story. To the guy that's in charge, I'm going to write a story in here that makes Peter look like an absolute failure, the worst moment in his life. I'm going to include it in there. No, this is evidence that Peter is going, I want you to include that, okay? And just imagine with me, okay, that clearly this is a plan B scenario, that Peter didn't do what he was supposed to do in that courtyard. If Peter had real faith, that he would have said, yes, I am with Jesus. And you know what would have happened probably? He probably would have been tossed into that courtroom alongside Jesus and been beaten and crucified right next to Jesus and been killed. Would never have written 1st and 2nd Peter. Would never have informed the Gospel of Mark, which then informs the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Would never have been the leader of the early church and how God used him in powerful ways there. Now, I'm not saying that he did the right thing by denying Christ. What I'm saying is plan B, because of the grace and the majesty of Jesus, that he can take a plan B and he can turn it into a plan A. So when we feel like, this is the thing, when we feel like I've blown it, I have failures in my life, I have divorces in my past, I have abortions in my past, I have a high number of people that I slept with in college, I have, all these things, whatever it is for you, that you go like, there's things in my past that I feel shame about, I feel bad about, I feel like this kind of disqualifies me from things. Listen, Peter cursed Jesus. He's the leader that Jesus, this is the guy that Jesus said, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, after Peter confessed that Jesus himself was the Messiah, okay? Jesus says that to Peter. And then after that, Peter is calling down curses on Jesus. Okay? It's that guy that Jesus shows up to and goes, hey, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Get back into the game. I have some stuff for you to do. Follow me. And then God uses him to just do just amazing things, right? We serve the God of second chances. That's who God is. He's the God of second chances. And so don't let the voice of the accuser chirp in your ear, because that's usually what it is. Usually it's not somebody else going, oh, you will never be a leader, or you will never be used by God or something. Usually it's not that. Usually it's a voice in our own head. That's the thing that keeps us from really stepping into everything that God has for us, of really following Jesus and keeping our eyes on him rather than putting our eyes on ourselves and going, I don't have what it takes. And Jesus is going, yeah, you don't. That's the point. I don't need people that think that they're bringing something to the table. I need people that have failed and know that they don't. And so they'll lift their eyes and they'll look at me and they'll believe me when I call them in and say, hey, I've got some things for you to do. Feed my sheep. No, I can't do that, God. I can't, because don't you know that no. Do you love me? Okay, cool. Feed my sheep. That's the requirement. The requirement is, do you love Jesus? And if that's a yes, then God has some things for you to do. All right, regardless of your failures, the things you've done wrong, the things that are in your past, you're not defined by your failures. You're defined by your love for Jesus Christ. Let's stand up together and pray. Let's close our eyes for a second. I want to invite some of us to respond to Jesus and to his love, to his grace. Those of you that maybe have bought inside, that you have believed a lie from the enemy, from your own self-condemnation, from wherever, but you've believed that you've disqualified yourself from what God has for you, from some things that God has. Maybe you had dreams in the past, you had hopes, you had a sense of how God wanted to use you, and you've just had to let go of that stuff because life happened. I want you to reach out to Jesus and to receive what he has for you. I want you to reach out and receive his love for you and declare your love for him. And Jesus has, see, if you're a follower of Jesus, he's got stuff for you to do. He's got things that he wants to use you in your family, use you in your workplace, use you in your school, use you in the church. For all of us, leadership is influence. It's about letting God pour himself into us and letting that spill out into other people around us. And every single one of us that is a follower of Jesus has influence, and God wants to use that influence for him and for his glory. And so listen, for some of you, maybe that's been knocked down because of mistakes that you've made, failures that you've made. I want you to have the courage to reach out to Jesus again and say, I love you, Jesus, and I'm in. I want to believe you for what you have for me to do. If that's you, put a hand in the air. I want to pray with you today, okay? Jesus, we're reaching out to you, God. We're reaching out from a place of our failure, from our sin, from our past, from all that stuff. And God, we want to take all of that junk and plunge it into your grace. Would you saturate us with what you have done because of your faithfulness? Because of your suffering and your death, you have made a way for us to find forgiveness and mercy and grace. And we reach out for you, God. We reach out because of your faithfulness, and we want to grab hold of it, God, and have it pull us forward. Would you heal us like you healed Peter? Would you change us and transform us? And God, would you use us in your service, in your kingdom? God, we want our lives to count for something. We want to make a dent in the universe. We want to do something for you in this world. We don't just want to live a life and then die. We want to be able to leave this world a better place than we found it, God. We want to leave it more full of you and your kingdom. And so, God, would you use us? Would you pour your love into us? And would you release us, God, into your service? In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. We're going to sing one more song, then I'll come up and close us.